We were attacked for losing money. We've been attacked for making money.
The world's most powerful man is on the defensive. Smear and innuendo have laid siege to the Clinton White House.
With recent news reports about the First Lady's cattle futures earnings and with all the Whitewater allegations, many of us Americans are having a hard time with your credibility. How can you earn back our trust?
First of all, I've not been accused of doing anything wrong.
Bill Clinton's accusers may lack credibility, but not effectiveness. Thanks for joining me. The president is in trouble. Accusations of serial womanising and shonky financial dealings are steadily eroding his public standing. The mud is beginning to stick. The President and the First Lady have already had to endure private grillings from a special investigator over the Whitewater affair. Soon they face open congressional hearings probing wider financial dealings in the Clintons' home state of Arkansas. Dealings which for Australians bear an uncanny resemblance to the WA ink scandal. The ABC's Washington correspondent Tony Jones went back to Arkansas to meet some of the extraordinary entrepreneurs now coming back to haunt the president. Tony Jones' report also sheds light on some of the shady characters behind the accusations, which now even run to drug smuggling and gun running by former Clinton mates.
Sir, thank you very much.
It's odd in the extreme that the president's fate should be tied to that of Jim McDougal. But this is the man who brought the Clintons into the tangled web of the Whitewater land deal. In 1978, Hillary took the family finances in hand. Through the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, she began gambling in risky cattle futures trades. In just 10 months, she made $100,000, having put up only $1,000. Her trades were handled by one of their best friends, Jim Blair, who also worked for Arkansas's biggest industry, Tyson's Foods. But now that her trade gambles have been made public, another of her former brokers in Little Rock is feeding suspicion about how she did it.
It is a stretch of the imagination for me to believe at this point that she could have taken $1,000 and made $100,000 with it.
Back at the beginning of the greedy 80s, while Whitewater lost money and Hillary made it, Governor Clinton infuriated big business in Arkansas. He took on the timber industry for its widespread clear felling. He took on the truckers and the power company. His radical team seemed a threat to almost every industry in Arkansas. And sure enough, most gave heavy backing to his opponent in 1980, including Tyson's Foods, a fact overlooked by those who believed that Hillary's windfall was an indirect payoff from the poultry giant. Now, the relationship Clinton had to his state's business elite is under intense scrutiny. This is Arkansas's scaled-down version of the Capitol building in Washington, and it's from here that Governor Bill Clinton launched himself into the presidency. Since then, his home state has become a scandal mill, churning out one damning allegation after another about his personal finances, his sex life, and the one-party state he ruled for more than a decade. Beyond Whitewater, he's accused of creating a sort of Arkansas Incorporated, giving tremendous business advantages to the so-called Friends of Bill, who were then expected to kick back into his campaign funds.
What we see in Arkansas is really backdoor connections, conflicts of interest, friends helping friends, and really a small group of cronies running the state for their own personal, political, and financial gain.
In 1985, Bill Clinton decided to bring Wall Street to Main Street. He created a new agency that sold tax-free bonds guaranteed by the state to finance industry. Much of America was built on bonds, but Clinton's idea was to give the state more control.
ADFA.
It was called the Arkansas Development Finance Authority, and while it boosted business, it made him enemies amongst those who thought it smacked of socialism.
ADFA became a conduit from which Bill Clinton could peddle influence.
I think there's some serious questions about the Arkansas Development and Finance Authority. First and foremost, It seemed to be a piggy bank for Bill Clinton's campaigns. Many of his campaign contributors were receiving huge loans from ADFA. And I think that the governor personally was involved in approving those loans.
There was something rotten in the state of Arkansas in the 1980s, something which Governor Clinton may have had limited knowledge of, but which during his tenure corrupted his state, undermined its law officers, and made a mockery of its judicial system. It's a story that goes back to Bill Clinton's attempt to fund industry through the state's bonding business. In the free-flowing financial climate, Little Rock bond traders flourished. One of the most successful was a flamboyant millionaire named Dan Lassiter. Lassiter's past relationship with Clinton could now be extremely damaging for the president. For Lassiter was a big campaign fundraiser until he was jailed on cocaine charges in 1986.
Dan Lassiter said that he had a corporate plane on which Bill and Hillary flew on occasions, and he said he regularly served cocaine on those flights, regularly held parties and served cocaine, and he said it was just a part of doing business. And among those people who he did business with the most were the President and the First Lady.
Lassiter's friendship with Roger Clinton became a political liability. The younger Clinton worked for Dan Lassiter until he too was arrested on cocaine charges.
My brother has apparently become involved with drugs, a curse which has reached epidemic proportion and has plagued millions of families in our country.
Although under investigation in the same case, Dan Lassiter was still making big deals with the state government. This man says he knows at least one major source of black money flowing into Lassiter and Company bond trades. In the mid-1980s, Terry Reid was a close associate of one of America's most prolific drug traffickers, Barry Seal. He says Seal and Lassiter were in business when he first met them.
Lassiter introduced himself as Barry Seal's investment banker at the time.
Who else was there?
Roger Clinton was in the company of the two, of course. At that time, Roger worked for Dan, in fact, was his chauffeur.
Roger Clinton, the president's brother?
Yes, Roger Clinton, the president's brother, was Dan Lassiter's chauffeur.
Reid says that Seal regularly passed on large sums of cash to Lassiter.
From what I observed, and from what Seal said, because he would typically arrive in town with a briefcase that he professed to either contain cash, or on a couple of occasions I actually did observe did have cash in them. And he would be very security conscious in taking his briefcase down to Lassiter's to have it put on deposit. It seemed to be a very close-knit, secretive operation, and I always presumed it was bond buying.
Despite his high profile, Barry Seal appeared to be immune to prosecution. He was flying regularly in and out of the country and had extensive facilities at the small airport in Mena, western Arkansas.
At that time, you had the IRS, the Arkansas State Police, the local police, the FBI, Customs, and others, all investigating or monitoring Barry Seal's activities. State police records say that he moved into Mena in 1982, and he brought a fleet of planes with him, and he was hauling cocaine into this country by the ton, and that's according to his own sworn testimony.
This was a CIA or government-run operation, provided government cover. We were not low profile ourselves. I based myself right out of this airport.
In 1984, Terry Reid became involved in a covert operation run by the CIA in Arkansas. Did you actually see weapons being air freighted out of the country?
Yes, I've seen weapons being loaded into his aircraft, and I've even observed weapons being assembled from component parts.
Police surveillance photos at the time placed Reid at the Mena airport.
I probed a pilot that flew with Terry Reid and knows that he was involved in the operation.
In 1991, former Democrat Congressman Bill Alexander headed a joint investigation of the CIA's activities in Mena for the U.S. Congress and the Arkansas Attorney General.
A number of the C-130s were used during the 1980s to transport small arms and munitions from MENA to support the war effort in Central America. And those same contract carriers would be used to bring drugs back to Arkansas.
The hub of the operation was the MENA airport, a staging point for huge military aircraft, which the townspeople welcomed as a boost to their local economy.
This would mean probably doubling the gross sales of the airport within the next 2 years.
The CIA's operation generated money all right, but not the sort people expected.
Money flows. Money laundering, a common occurrence, really to the point of being blatant, out in the open.
An investigator for the Federal Internal Revenue Service, Bill Duncan, tried to follow the money trail.
People on the street talking about it, people in the banks talking about it. A bank vice president walking down the teller line handing out stacks, $10,000 to get cashier's checks for the SEAL associates.
It seems to me that you're talking about an operation sanctioned by a high government agency, the CIA, to smuggle drugs into this country.
There's no doubt in my mind that we have direct evidence that on order from the National Security Council, which was executed by the CIA, that drugs were smuggled into the United States for whatever purposes. And then those drugs found their ways into the bloodstreams of children in the United States.
Nobody was ever prosecuted. No one was ever indicted. And by that time, the risk was over.
The risk that the Central Intelligence Agency would be exposed, for example.
Right.
But you were put under tremendous pressure to prevent you from making these disclosures.
Excruciating pressure.
Drugs have a way of corrupting local officials, have a way of corrupting governments. There's certainly some corrupting influence in the state of Arkansas. We don't know the extent of that corruption. It needs to be discovered.
I believe that he had to know if the Central Intelligence Agency had an extensive operation over a number of years in the state of Arkansas.
If you had the opportunity to put your case to him now, what would you say to President Clinton?
Why didn't you, after these issues came to light, go direct to Washington and say, what's going on here? I don't like what I see happening in my state.
Vince Foster was another old friend from Arkansas. He worked for the Clintons as a senior White House lawyer until he was found shot to death in July last year. Because of her presence in his office on the night of his death, Patsy Thomason is under subpoena from the Fisk inquiry, and until he reports, she's saying nothing.
Mr. Istook, I think the direction of this question is toward the Vince Foster episode, and I would decline, Mr. Chairman, to answer any questions with regard to that.
But she's a clear target for Republican cross-examination as they attempt to build a bridge between the president and Dan Lasseter's illegal doings.